What if nothing in reality exists entirely by itself? Not you, not a tree, not a particle, not even the chair you're sitting on. More than 1,800 years ago, the Buddhist philosopher Nāgārjuna argued that everything is empty, not because nothing exists, but because nothing possesses an independent permanent essence. And this is where we begin Chapter 9, Relational, Reality and Systems Thinking. In this video, we'll explore what Nāgārjuna meant by emptiness, why it isn't nihilism, and why ideas from systems theory, neuroscience, and even modern physics sometimes seem to point towards a strangely similar conclusion. Because perhaps reality isn't fundamentally made of things. Perhaps it's made of relationships. Physics, Consciousness and Reality, Dickie Dredd and Nigel Adams. And this is part 57 in the video series, and first of all we'll have an introduction to Chapter 9. So Chapter 9, Relational Reality and Systems Thinking. Chapter 9 further brings Eastern philosophy into the conversation, beginning with Nāgārjuna's radical critique of essence. His central teaching of śūnyatā, emptiness, dismantles the idea that things possess intrinsic being. A chair, rock, even the self, none exists independently. Each arises only through conditions, relations and context. Far from nihilism, emptiness is an affirmation of interconnection. Things exist not only because they are woven into a web of causes. Modern science resonates here. Systems theory, ecology and neuroscience all show how wholes emerge from networks, not from isolated building blocks. Quantum mechanics, too, demonstrates that particles have no fixed essence apart from the interconnections that define them. From this, the text moves naturally into dependent origination, where emptiness is the theory, dependent origination is its lived dynamic. The Buddha's phrase, when this is that, when this ceases, that ceases, distills the principle, nothing arises in isolation. Traditional 12-linked chain of causation diagnosis diagnoses how ignorance leads to suffering. But the principle extends to everything: ecosystems, economies, brains, societies. Examples from ecology, markets, neuroscience and the internet show how apparently solid things are contingent processes. Dependent origination also underlies ethics. If all actions ripple through a network, then responsibility is unavoidable. It reframes individuality not as self-contained freedom, but as conditional agency. This chapter then introduces Taoism, which brings a complementary tone. When where Buddhism diagnoses causes of suffering, Taoism invites harmony with the flow of life. The Tao is the way, the unfolding process of reality. Living well means practicing Wu Wei, effortless action aligned with the currents of the world, rather than forced control. Water becomes the central metaphor, yielding yet transformative. Taoist yin-yang highlights complementarity rather than opposition, perspective that finds surprising echoes in modern physics. Taoism, like Buddhism, offers a relational view of reality, but its emphasis is trust in the flow rather than dismantling illusion. Taken together, these three perspectives sketch a worldview where essence gives way to relation, isolation gives way to interdependence, and control gives way to flow. Do not propose a metaphysics of fixed truths, but practices of perception and living. Their convergence with science, from systems theory to quantum mechanics, suggests that Eastern insights are not just cultural artifacts, but profound tools for thinking about consciousness and reality today. So we now get on to the first part in Chapter 9, Section 54, Emptiness and Relational Reality, Nāgārjuna's Critique of Essence. In the 2nd century CE, the Buddhist philosopher Nāgārjuna set out one of the most radical perspectives in history of thought. His central idea was śūnyatā, usually translated as emptiness. To a modern reader, emptiness may sound like nihilism, as if Nāgārjuna were denying that anything exists at all, but that is a misunderstanding. His point was subtler. Nothing possesses inherent essence. No thing, no person, no concept itself exists by itself. Everything is contingent, dependent, relational. Take a chair. You might be tempted to think there is some essential chairness that makes it what it is. Nagarjuna would argue there is not. The chair arises only because of wood, the craftsman who shaped it, the tools used, the floor on which it sits, the language you use to call it a chair. Remove these conditions and the chair vanishes. It has no independent, permanent existence. It is empty of intrinsic being. For Nagarjuna, this was not an abstract parlour game. It applied to everything: rocks, clouds, feelings, identities. All are patterns emerging from interdependent conditions. The most intimate application of view is to the self. What we call I is not an enduring essence, but a bundle of processes: perception, memory, body, consciousness, strung together by habit and language. The doctrine of anatta, no self, is not a side note, but the natural extension of emptiness. Seen this way, emptiness is not negation, but interconnection. Far from saying nothing exists, Nagarjuna argued that things exist only through their relations. His famous phrase captures the paradox: form is emptiness, emptiness is form. What appears solid in this is in fact relational process. What is empty of essence is full of conditions. This idea resonates with modern science in surprising ways. Systems theory, for example, insists that wholes cannot be reduced to their parts, and we talked about that in section 12. A living organism is not just a heap of molecules, but a network of relations that maintain themselves. Ecology takes the same stance at a larger scale. No species can exist in isolation from its environment. Remove bees and whole ecosystems collapse. Quantum mechanics also hints at this relational reality. Subatomic particles do not have fixed properties waiting to be uncovered. Instead, properties emerge through interaction, through measurement, through relation. Entanglement is not the mysterious binding of two independent things, but the demonstration that their identities cannot be separated at all. There is no essence of the particle apart from its relational context. Neuroscience offers another bridge. Studies of perception increasingly suggest that the brain does not give us reality as it is, but constructs an interface suited to survival. Colours, sounds and objects are not absolute features of the world, but interpretations created by neural processes interacting with sensory input. In this sense, the things we experience are empty of inherent qualities. Red is not built into the world. It is a relation between wavelengths, nervous systems and consciousness. Interface theory of perception, developed by Donald Hoffman and others, see section 10, echoes Nagarjuna's insight. It argues that what we see is more like icons on a desktop than raw truth. The tree we perceive is not the essence of treeness, but a simplified symbol generated by evolutionary pressures to guide behaviour. Nagarjuna would recognise this. The tree has no intrinsic essence. It arises in dependence on conditions: light, biology, language, cognition. Even mathematics finds a curious parallel. Modern physics often works with abstract structures, symmetries, manifolds, probabilities that have no essence apart from the relations they define. The amplitude-hedron, for instance, is not a substance but a geometrical object encoded in the relationship between scattering events, and we talked about that in section 8. In this light, Nagarjuna's critique of essence foreshadows a worldview where relations, not things, are primary. Why does this matter? For one, it undermines the idea of a permanent separate self. If I am not a nexus of just a nexus of relations, genetic, social, psychological, then clinging to a solid ego is misguided. This dovetails with Buddhist practice. Recognising emptiness can soften the grip of selfish craving. Compassion arises naturally when we see that harming another is, in a deep sense, harming ourselves. It also matters for how we approach knowledge. If nothing has intrinsic essence, then no theory captures reality once and for all. Knowledge becomes a set of models, useful, partial, provisional. Science, in this sense, is already operating in Nagarjuna's spirit. Theories are not mirrors of reality, but tools for navigating it. Of course, there are differences. Science is committed to testing models against observation, while Nagarjuna's goal was liberation from suffering. But the resonance remains. Both undercut essentialism. Both show that the solidity we project onto the world is, at best, a convenient fiction. In contemporary debates about consciousness, emptiness offers a striking perspective. Rather than asking how a self-contained I generates experience, we might ask how relational processes give rise to the illusion of self. The fragility of the I, seen in the neuroscience, split brain patients, shifting sense of agency, illusions of control, aligns with the Buddhist critique of essence. There is no single solid core of self inside the brain, only networks of dependent processes. Nagarjuna's vision of emptiness is thus not just ancient speculation, but a philosophical orientation with startling modern relevance. Whether in physics, ecology, neuroscience, or cognitive science, the message is similar. Reality is relational. Things are not what they are in isolation, but what they are through the conditions that give rise to them. To say they are empty is not to erase them, but to see them more clearly as fragile, contingent, and interconnected. So Nāgārjuna's emptiness doesn't tell us that the world is unreal. It tells us that nothing stands alone. Objects, organisms, identities, and even the self arise through networks of conditions and relationships. If this is true, then perhaps searching for the ultimate essence, hidden inside things, is the wrong approach. Reality may be less like a collection of separate objects, more like an unfolding web of relationships. And this is only the beginning of chapter 9. In the next video, we'll examine one of the most famous and extraordinary expressions of this idea in Buddhist philosophy, the Heart Sutra, and the remarkable claim that form is emptiness, emptiness is form.